In Lees-Galloway.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's as other members have indicated, it is a goodness me. I thought this was a fairly non-contentious bill, and all of a sudden things have heated up a little bit. I was going to say, Mr. Speaker, that it's like other members have said, it's a pleasure to rise and speak on a bill which has cross-party support. This, of course, is something we know in the House happens quite regularly, but people out in the public sort of feel that the opposition opposes for the sake of opposing sometimes, but we know that's not true. Mr. Garrett has spoken about his appreciation of the opposition's support of this bill, and of course the Private Security Personnel and Private Investigators Bill was originally tabled by the Honourable Clayton Cosgrove when Labor was in government. Well, Mr. Cosgrove did a lot of things right, Mr. Garrett. He did a lot of things right, and he looks forward to the opportunity to get more things right when Labor returns to government in the future. But as people have said, this bill is about tidying up a very, very old act that was in desperate need of review and desperately needed bringing into the 21st century. The Act being from 1974, I note, is actually older than a lot of the people who have spoken in the debate this afternoon. So it's 1947, is it? And so it's definitely important that we do this sort of work to tidy things up. A number of the concerns that the opposition do have with the bill have, of course, already been described, but it is important to note that Clause 66, which is the clause that has the most concern, certainly the submissions on that clause at Select Committee were not unanimous by any stretch, and that is why I think that the conversation needs to continue, and I do hope that the government are open-minded to amendments that the opposition will be putting up at the Committee of the Whole House, because the Select Committee did hear divergent views on this topic. And while a number of people did argue that the original restriction would inhibit the work of private investigators, and that the public interest in investigating criminal activity outweighs public privacy, there were a number of people who argued that the clause should be retained to avoid potential abuse and unfairness that would result from that. And of course, I think that in a way goes to the heart of what this bill is actually all about, because as Richard Worth said in the first reading of this bill, most members of the industry are professionals. And they are people in whom New Zealanders can place their trust. And so often this is the case with legislation, isn't it? That we're legislating something which actually the vast majority of the public or the vast majority of operators who fall under the legislation are actually quite happily operating within the bounds of the legislation, and in fact their business will not be affected. If anything, it will be enhanced. This is about picking up the people who aren't operating appropriately or effectively and really need a little bit of support, legislative support, to encourage them along that way. And so when looking at Clause 66, we need to think about how the amended clause, as it has come back from Select Committee, might potentially be abused. And I think the conversation continues. There are different points of view across the House, and we do have an opportunity as this bill progresses to look at that and come to a consensus approach, I think, around this. Important to remember as well that the Law Commission's privacy review is still continuing, and the outcome of that is uncertain, and the shape of any new legislation that might be resulted from that Law Commission review still is not clear. So it does make sense, really, to retain the status quo and look to what the Law Commission is doing in this area, and perhaps come back and revisit it when all that advice is available to us and all the research and the consideration that the Law Commission is putting into it is available and comes back to us. The one last thing that I'd just like to note is the importance of having this in place before the World Cup comes in. Our international reputation is hugely important to us here in New Zealand. Tourism is a big industry, and so what we do in environmental policy, what we do in terms of law and order, and how we treat tourists when they come to New Zealand is incredibly important. And so There is no doubt that a number of people will come to the attention of private security personnel, but those personnel need to be consummate professionals. They need to have the proper training behind them, and they need to treat those tourists well and with respect, so that even if they do come to the attention of those people, they still go home feeling as though they've been treated fairly and appropriately. Mr. Speaker, this is a good bill. It has good support in the House. It does need some tidying up, and the opposition looks forward to being able to offer good suggestions during the Committee of the Whole House, but we are happy to support it through this reading.
Called